And we heard stories, you know, about who Lenin was, who Stalin was, who these guys were, et cetera, et cetera. And then here in America, if you drop the name Putin to the average person, and let's just say David goes on the streets, there's a man on the street in New York, or he does in Miami. If you ask 100 people who's Putin, they're going to say what? Dictator, he's this, he's that, he's a murderer. He's going to say all this stuff about him, right? Now, you have actually interviewed with him. I don't know how many hours you guys were together. It was a project that took quite a while to do, and 4 of these interviews were launched. So who is Putin to you, having spent one-on-one time with him? How different is it than what we see on TV, how he's portrayed?
You probably don't want to hear it, but he's a son of Russia in the sense that he has Russian interests are foremost in his mind, as would any leader in any country, whether it's the Philippines or Taiwan or this or that. I mean, he cares about his country and he serves it. That's the way and that's why he's there, because people feel that he's there. And they talk about he's a tyrant, but he wouldn't stay in office in Russia, the Russia that I know, and many people would agree with this, that if he was a monster, which is pictured in the West, he'd be out of office because it wouldn't work. They have this indirect democracy, so to speak. The people are not happy, things are bad, the guy is out. And that's told me other things. Among them was Stephen Cohn, who I became very friendly with. Cohn was, I think, the leading Sovietologist in our country. He studied Russia. He gave me, point by point, all the descriptions of these murders and who possibly did them, but it would be ridiculous for Putin to have done them, because the motive would have come right back on him. He would have been, I mean, it's beyond, the narrative is so poorly constructed against him by the CIA, and it's been a narrative there for, what is it, 20 years now? Mm-hmm. 20 years of lying and blaming everything on Russia. You have to be a little bit more fair-minded. You have to be open to say that, is it possible that Russia has done all this and we're the good guys? It's like a good versus bad scenario. It feels like a John Wayne movie. It's not. We're not John Wayne. We have been trying to destabilize Russia since 1917, actually. The opening was over. And of course, Stalin is not, I'm not saying he was a tyrant. That was a tyrant. And he was a murderer, and he killed people. But that doesn't change the effort that Russia made in World War II and the sacrifice they made and how they helped us too. So you have to balance the good and the bad. The people who hate Russia, of course, point to Stalin as the most evil man of all time, worse than Hitler. So they make a whole scenario about him, but they ignore what the Russians' contribution was to World War II. And Stalin, frankly, held that country together at that time. He was a tough guy. But you have to sometimes you have to lie in bed with people like that to get what you need. And America has to be realistic about it. You can't be a child about comic book heroes. So anyway, Putin is, listen, I'm limited. I spent 4 trips, maybe 30 hours with a man. So, and the result, you should see it. I hope you see it. It's called the Putin Interviews. It's 4 hours long. He answers these questions that we're dealing with today. Ukraine, foremost in his mind at that point. This was 2000, right after 14. This was 16 area. And he tells me the whole story from his point of view, even down to who's firing who. Who are the people who are firing shots at Maidan? It's not pro-Russian forces, because they're firing from buildings occupied by the protesters. It's people who are snipers who are firing at the crowd, killing both policemen and protesters. That's the whole point. It was like the same thing that happened in Venezuela back around that time. That's a CIA technique. Color revolution, then you have the violence. The violence breaks out. Somebody's killing somebody, but you kill from both sides. You create this disturbance. And they killed a lot of cops. They killed protesters, and that kicked off. So who did it? Who was firing from those buildings? there was lots of stories about the neo-Nazi gangs that were coming into Kiev from the west of Ukraine. It's most likely them. I mean, it probably was them. It may have been some foreign mercenaries too. So there was all that violence is what creates that mood for change. So they throw the president out illegally. They don't have an election. We install this guy, the one
other Victor,
whoever he was. Victoria Nuland is there from the State Department. She's the leader of the neocon faction. And the American ambassador, it's all we got the recordings. They're talking about getting rid, and she even says "fuck the EU" because the EU wants to do it more legally. You know, the Nazis have much more power in Ukraine than you think. The United States denies it because they say Zelensky's a Jew, and that's their motivation for saying, "Well, how can they be neo-Nazi?" That's nonsense. Neo-Nazis were there way before Zelensky, and Zelensky had no power. In fact, when he became president, he had to make a deal with them. He had to make a deal with them because they're tough people. They're not gonna, they are telling the president what to do. You cannot change the Ukraine policies. You have the United States telling you what to do, and you have the neo-Nazis telling you what to do. And it's disgusting that the United States condones, it doesn't mention them, doesn't talk about them, but basically condones what the neo-Nazis are doing in Ukraine. That's what's sick. Really sick. So when you talk about all that, Putin is talking about that. He talks about Ukraine, and he talks a lot about NATO. This was back then. He saw it. For him, it's you're putting my back against the wall. You're pushing me. You're strangling me. We're surrounding them. We made the Baltics very aggressive towards them. Sweden, Finland, Poland has been. We put anti-ballistic missiles in Poland. That's horrible. And Romania. And these missiles can be adapted to an offensive weaponry, and in 5 minutes could be in Moscow. You see, from their point of view, they feel the squeeze. You put his back up against the wall, what are you doing? You're going to create a state either where he's going to go to war and he's going to fight back, and he's got the nuclear weapons to do so. They're crude weapons, but they're very big, strong weapons, hypersonic missiles. We have very refined weapons. We have great weapons too, but I wouldn't want to be there in that war. It's not a war that makes any sense for the world, and we're pushing him to the wall. Either that, or else we'll get what we want, which is regime change. Bring in some guy like Yeltsin was in 1990, who would work with us, basically cannibalize the country, and allow their resources to be exploited.
Tehát az önigazgató társadalom csíráit kell elhelyeznünk, és el kell kezdenünk dolgozni rajta, mert ha most hip-hop leváltjuk a kormányt, akkor, ahogy az egyik előadó mondta itt ma, nem fog megváltozni. A Lenkei Gábor mondta, azt hiszem. Egy új sárkányfej fog kinőni a helyére. Gondolatokkal kell felszerelkeznünk, és el kell kezdenünk építkezni, ez egy lassú folyamat, de ez a mostani 3 év, hogy most egy kicsit ezotérikus vizekre evezzek megint, ez egy történelmi ritmus része. A rendszerváltáskor is volt egy szansz, amit elmulasztottunk. Azóta eltelt 30 év, ugye ez Krisztus idő, Krisztus 30 évig nem tanított, addig csak Jézus volt, és akkortól Jézus Krisztus, és 3 évig tanított. Most ez a 3 Krisztus év zajlik, 2020, 21, 22. Ez egy időablak, ami be fog zárulni. Jövő év végéig el kell kezdjük az átalakítást, az építkezést. Ha nem tesszük meg, akkor még pokolibb rendszer lesz itt, mint a fasizmus és a bolsevizmus együttvéve. Úgyhogy vigaszul csak annyit mondanék, amit idéznék az evangéliumból, hogy Krisztus hogy viszonyult a maszkviseléshez és a távolságtartáshoz. Ő, aki odament a leprásokhoz, és amikor megszólták, hogy miért nem mos kezet fertőtlenítő folyadékkal evés előtt, akkor azt mondta, hogy nem azt teszi tisztátalanná az embert, ami bemegy a száján, hanem ami kijön a szájából. Köszönöm a figyelmet.